Global Affairs Canada wants us to believe that Beijing air quality is the reason they're having trouble recruiting staff to the Chinese embassy. I think there's an even more frightening reason, and no, it's not the pandemic. Canada's Foreign Affairs Ministry cannot find people to work at well-paying diplomatic posts in China, and the Canadian government is blaming smog. Blacklocks has the story today sitting behind their paywall. Look at this. The air is so filthy in Beijing that Canada now has trouble staffing its embassy, the Department of Foreign Affairs said yesterday. China had won praise from Infrastructure Minister Catherine McKenna for its climate change program. Beijing has some of the world's worst air quality, the Foreign Ministry wrote in a notice to contractors for embassy renovations. Pollution was so pervasive, it was hurting morale, said the notice. Air quality remains a concern for all staff and the Canadian-based families as it has a direct impact on their quality of life. For example, remaining indoors, limiting physical exercise, wearing protective face masks while outdoors, as well as on their respiratory and cardiovascular health, particularly those with small children, and overall morale, wrote staff. In addition, the air quality issue has an impact on staff retention and recruitment, with some staff considering early departure from the mission and the department experiencing difficulties in filling positions due to concerns over air quality. I think this smog problem might be a reason for some people, but for others, I think it's a cheap excuse for the government and it's an easy way out. Maybe some people don't want to be in China for the next time the communists lie to the world about the latest pandemic. That's reasonable. I can definitely understand that. But I'm not so sure. I believe there are a lot of people who would give up the Chinese embassy to Rich's pipeline because of smog. Becoming embassy staff often results in six-figure job offers and powerful influence after the fact. Just look at John McCallum. The former Liberal MP was appointed by cabinet to be the ambassador to China, but then he started acting as the Chinese ambassador to Canada, basically. McCallum once insisted that Canada had more in common with China than the United States. McCallum has even called for the release of Huawei executive Meng Wanzhou. She was arrested at the Vancouver airport 2 years ago by Canadian officials because she is wanted on crimes, including bank fraud in the United States. Now, even Trudeau, as dumb as he is, knew that McCallum had to be fired for that. But even a public firing didn't stop McCallum from being a CCP minion. Cian Bexte had the full story at ChineseLobbyist.com on how McCallum, after he was fired, may have broken Canadian lobbying laws. Look at this. McCallum bragged in a speech to Land Group that he had an exclusive conversation with his old cabinet pal, the current Minister of Immigration and Citizenship, Marco Mendicino. And the results of that conversation convinced him that the Canadian government's policy is favorable to the position of the Chinese firm. Not that Liberals care all that much about ethics and rules, you know, the fish rots from the head down and all, but there's a 5-year moratorium on lobbying when you leave the cabinet table, and that's why we hired a lawyer and prepared a complaint to the Office of the Lobbying Commissioner. Now, you can read that complaint and support our investigation into John McCallum at ChineseLobbyist.com. The moral of the story here is, if you're willing to be an utter stooge for Xi Jinping, the cash and job offers just fall right off the money tree, right into your communist apologist pockets, just like John McCallum. Can I tell you what I think the real reason for the inability to staff the embassy is? I think the fear of a potential kidnapping is probably the more likely reason Global Affairs Canada can't find diplomatic staff to work these well-paid jobs in Beijing. You see, the prospect of being a political hostage of the Chinese government, combined with the absolute complete uselessness of the Trudeau Liberals in the event of such a horrible catastrophe, well, those are probably the real reasons the Canadian government can't get anyone to work at their office in Beijing. Canadians Michael Spavor and Michael Kovrig are approaching 2 years in captivity, taken as hostage by the Chinese government in response to Canadian law enforcement meeting treaty obligations with an ally, the United States, when they arrested Meng Wanzhou for crimes she committed in the United States. I can't imagine a 6-figure job offer would offset the potential of spending years in a squalid Chinese prison for crimes you didn't commit, knowing that the Prime Minister is too dumb, too lazy, or too compromised by China to ever get you home. Trudeau has done very little to get those 2 men back home, but at Rebel News, we've hired a top human rights lawyer to draft a formal complaint to the United Nations. You see, we want to bring international attention to the plight of the 2 Michaels as they have become known. We have a budget of $15,000 for this project between legal fees and travel to the United Nations. We might be successful in shaming the Chinese into complying with international laws and eventually releasing the men. But more importantly, we have to do something. You can donate today at freethe2michaels.com. At that website, you can read the 44-page complaint to the United Nations. Smog wouldn't keep diplomats out of Beijing, but I think fear of one's life just might. For Rebel News, I'm Sheila Gunn Reid. To read the full 44-page human rights complaint we hired a lawyer to draft to the United Nations and to help cover the costs of our attempts to raise the international profile of the plight of Michael Spavor and Michael Kovrig, please go to freethe2michaels.com.